So standing behind this beautiful bouquet, it's easy to imagine we're going to talk about flowers today, and we are indeed. We're going to talk about inflorescence, vegetables that are also flowers that also get eaten. And so let's take a look. You probably recognize these as flowers. These are squash blossoms. That's where zucchini comes from. And then here, a thistle that you probably recognize as an artichoke is still closed up into a tight bud, but when it opens, there's the most remarkable show of purple filaments that are actually the choke at the inside of the blossom. Here on the back, I have some broccoli, which is a flower that has yet to open. And in the front, another variation, broccoli rabe. It's in the turnip family, or rapini sometimes it's called. That's also a blossom. Now, if I show you this, you can see that the blossoms on this have begun to open. You can see the yellow flowers. That's not ideal because when you cook that, those flowers are so tender, they just fall apart into mush, and the vegetable's not very much fun to eat. So you want them nice and tight and closed up. Here is a vegetable, cauliflower, that takes its name from flowers. A white cauliflower, and then more recently they've been bred into different colors, yellow, purple, and I have green cauliflower here in the back. They'll all taste almost exactly the same, but the color might be something that attracts you. And then maybe my favorite of everything that you see here is this. This is Romanesco. This is Romanesco cauliflower, and it's made up of tiny little spirals. The large head is the same as the smaller heads that make up the large head, and then there's smaller heads still that make up the medium-sized heads. And as you stare at it, it becomes a little bit hypnotic. You kind of get lost in this. Certainly I do. I'm sort of loath to cook it because I love to look at it for so long, and then I'll put it away and I'll bring it out and I'll look at it again. If I can remind you of one thing surrounding Romanesco, don't forget to cook it, because invariably in my house, it rots before I get around to cooking it. All right, let's move this out of the way and get started. The first dish I'm going to make is going to feature cauliflower. In the Eastern Mediterranean, they make a dish called shawarma, which is grilled meat, usually chicken or lamb. But today, I'm going to do it with cauliflower instead. So, first thing we need to do is cut the core out of this cauliflower. It can be a little intimidating. I think a good, stiff, strong knife is the thing to use. And just take your time. And there we go. That's out. Let me discard all the leaves. These leaves, when the cauliflower is growing, sort of reach up and surround the cauliflower and protect it from light so that it doesn't turn dark. Most cauliflower is self-blanching. All right, now I'm going to take this cauliflower and instead of cut it into smaller pieces, what I'd like to do is break it into florets, just like this. And then when we get a series of florets, I can decide if I think they're too large, too small. For our purposes here, that's too large. But I don't want to cut it in half or in thirds, but instead cut just through the stem and break this apart. And the reason I do that is because I don't think that looks particularly natural. Flowers shouldn't be flat on one side. So cut through the stem. Break it apart. If it's still too large, cut the stem again and break it apart. All right, so there's the cauliflower all cut up. And what I'm going to do is blanch it. In blanching, you just drop it into boiling water and let it cook or partially cook. That's the idea. I'm going to put some salt in it. It's just coming up to a boil. And in goes the cauliflower. While that's blanching, we're going to put a spice mix together. When you make shawarma, typically the meat is heavily seasoned with a spicy marinade. And so let me show you what I've got here for spices. Salt. Here I've got turmeric. black pepper, cumin. In the front, this is Aleppo pepper. It's a pepper flake from the Eastern Mediterranean. I've got cinnamon, coriander, allspice, and then finally paprika. A lot of flavor right there, but we've got a lot of vegetable matter to season. So all of these spices go right into the bowl. And then I'm going to make a flavorful oil, or a flavorful fat. In goes olive oil, and in goes melted butter. All right. We'll take and mix that up. As soon as that hot butter hit those spices, it became incredibly aromatic. So the question is, how long do we blanch it? I could give you a time, let's say about 2 minutes. You could also take a piece of cauliflower and see how tender it's become. I want this to hang on just a little bit. I don't want it to be cooked all the way. So 2 minutes, still a little bit of resistance. I think all of those things are appropriate. And this gets the cooking process started. Okay. Just drain off some excess moisture and then right into this flavorful fat. And this can be done well in advance. You know, this could live very happily on your countertop for a couple of hours, or you could do it a day ahead and put it in your refrigerator. The longer it marinates, the more flavor it'll probably have. The other thing that blanching this cauliflower does is it heats it up and it sort of activates these spices. All right, we'll stir this together and make sure that all of the cauliflower is well coated with the marinade. You know, I'm a big advocate of just tasting things as you go. You can taste it if you think it doesn't have quite enough salt, or if you like it spicier, you can add more pepper. But that looks great. Make sure that the blossoms really absorb this fat. Okay, we're going to grill this, and I've got a grill that's hot over here. Don't worry about oiling the grill because there's plenty of oil in the marinade. And it might surprise you, but I'm going to be pretty aggressive with the grilling. I want this to char just a little bit. I think that adds depth and complexity to what's going on here. And we'll let that cook. My guess is it's going to take about 5 to 10 minutes to cook. We'll turn it when it's charred on one side and move on. In the meantime, what I'd like to do is make a sauce that can go with the shawarma. It's pretty traditional. It's a tahini yogurt sauce. And it comes together very, very quickly. Here I have some yogurt, and into that yogurt I'm going to stir tahini. Now tahini is nothing more than sesame paste. So what peanut butter is to peanuts, tahini is to sesame seeds. So we'll stir those together. I'm going to add some cayenne pepper and a little bit of garlic. And again, we'll stir this together. Now it's a little bit tight, but don't worry about that because we're going to add some lemon juice. Tastes great already. There's no salt in there, so we'll make sure that happens. I want some cilantro in here. You know, there are times when I taste this and it's a little bit sharp, and at those times I can stir in a little bit of honey and smooth it out. I don't think this needs it. I think it tastes great all on its own, but keep it in your toolbox as an option, all right? Finally, if this is a little bit too thick, just add some water. And we can set that aside. This is good to go. We're starting to see a little bit of browning, and that's exactly what I want, but not delicate browning. I want to see a little bit of char. So monitor its progress. If you think you're getting some browning, you can turn it. This looks great. I wish you were here because it smells great too. I'm going to baste it a little bit with some of this marinade. The fat in the marinade is pretty remarkable. What fat does for food is not just add calories or add flavors, but fat has the ability to bring heat to food in a very even, controlled way. So this will brown much, much better for having that little bit of fat there. All right, this garlic I don't think we're going to need. I'll just throw it into the marinade. It can do some good still. What I'd like to do is talk about how this dish is going to look when it's all done. Typically when you enjoy shawarma, it comes in a pita bread, and there's a number of different accompaniments, different salads is what they would call them. You may be familiar with some of these salads already. Let me just lay this out here in front. As an example, probably hummus is something that you know, the chickpea salad that they make with tahini and olive oil and lemon juice. Here is another. This is tzatziki. And tzatziki, or in Turkey I think they call it cacik, is basically a cucumber salad with a yogurt dressing. Oftentimes in this country we think of them as dips, but they would call them salads there. In an earlier show, I made some pickled vegetables, and we're going to add some of those pickles right here. Some pickled onions, and here's some pickled zucchini. I think these look great side by each. Let me set this aside for just a second. I'm going to slice up some tomatoes. And then finally, we've got the pita bread. And I'm just going to cut that into halves. And we'll hold on to that for just a second. I'm starting to get the feeling, just from the way it smells, that this cauliflower is just about where we want it. If you can see the little bit of charring that's going on, a nice dark color. One of the great things about being the chef is you can taste it. Salt is right. The spices have just exploded into flavor. They really taste great. So this is coming off the grill. And as excited as you are about eating this, make sure that you turn the grill off before you walk away. The pita breads can just be warmed up. I'm going to warm them over an open flame. You can do this on the grill as well. You can use tongs. And I think that's good to go. It's time for us to build a couple of sandwiches. Now, the problem with pita sandwiches is that they're not flat like regular sandwiches. You need to balance them up on the edge. So oftentimes what I will do is just take something like oranges or lemons and create some little wedges that I can nestle the sandwiches against. I'm going to take the pita bread and open it up. And inside goes some of my tahini sauce. I'm just going to spread a lot of it. Think of it like any other spread that you might put on a sandwich, like a mayonnaise or a mustard. That's going to go in there. I'm going to put in a leaf of lettuce, just like that. Maybe we'll put some tomato in. And then finally, we've got this wonderful cauliflower that can go in. And that, I would say, is a meal that is surprising on one hand because people are expecting meat, but every bit as delicious as the meat version that you'll find in the Eastern Mediterranean. Cauliflower shawarma. So we're going to cook another flower right now. We're going to cook artichokes. Artichokes are really weeds. They're thistles that grow by the road, and whoever thought to eat an artichoke the first time, my hat's off to them, because it's a little bit of work. When you work with artichokes, it's important that you've got some water on the side that you have acidulated with a little bit of lemon juice. So I'll squeeze some lemon juice right into here, and what that will do is it will keep them from browning. There's enzymes in artichokes that when they're exposed to air, they begin to brown, and the acidity in that lemon juice sort of stops that process dead in its tracks. All right, first step with an artichoke, sort of pull these really tough, small leaves from around the base. Typically, they'll be darker in color, and you can sort of see that they are here. Typically, it's the first two courses of leaves that are very tough and hard, and I take them off because it's hard to cut through them with a knife. All right, I think we're in good shape there. These can be discarded. The next thing I want to do is cut the top off. So, a nice sharp knife. Okay, and I'll take this and discard it. It's a little alarming how much waste there is, but these are weeds after all, so anything we get is a step in the right direction. Now, anytime you have made a cut, I would encourage you to dip it into the acidulated water just to keep it from browning. All right, now the other end, the stem, I'm just going to cut that short, and we'll discard that. Again, dip it into the water. And then with a sharp paring knife, what I would have you do is come in here and then just turn or cut around the artichoke. And what you want to do is leave behind all the dark green leaves and expose something that's never been exposed to light before, so it's nice and yellow. Every place you see the dark green, just keep turning your knife, and that looks pretty good to me. So let's take and discard this. Let's dip this into the acidulated water. And now we have to deal with this dark green. So with your knife, just cut through the dark green and turn the artichoke heart, leaving behind only the light, pale color of the artichoke heart. And then finally, I'm going to cut down from the stem and angle my knife so that I get everything else that was objectionable, tough, hard, dark green. All right, back into the water. Now, what you have there is an artichoke heart. there's still one more task to do, and that is, in the very center is the choke. So if I cut down and I cut this into quarters, let's say, you can see this feathery center. This is what's known as the choke. We need to take that out. And the way to do it is just to cut it out. So I'm going to come in here with my knife. Any residual can just be scraped away. Typically, all of the purple topped leaves need to come out. Otherwise, what you'll discover is they have a little spike on their end, and it's not particularly pleasant to eat. That's all cleaned. We'll do the same thing. Cut out the choke. Make sure that these purple leaves go bye-bye. And put it right into the water. So it takes a little bit of time, but after you've done a dozen artichokes, you'll be an expert. We're going to make a stew with these artichokes. And the stew is going to have only vegetables. It's a artichoke stew, artichoke and potato avgolemino, the way they might do it in Greece. In the pan, I'm going to add some olive oil. That's the cooking fat of choice in Greece. And then I'm going to add to the hot fat some onions that have been diced up. And while those are cooking, let me go ahead and just cut some celery as well. I'm just going to dice the celery, and we'll add that. That'll be the foundational flavors for our stew. While these vegetables are cooking, I'm going to prepare the rest of these vegetables. I've got potatoes and I've got carrot. The carrot, I'm going to do something called an oblique cut or a roll cut. The big challenge with carrots is that they're thin on one end and fat on the other, and so how do you make them the same size? Here's a great technique. Cut at about a 45-degree angle, and then roll and cut again, and roll and cut again, roll and cut. And as the carrot starts to get bigger, you don't have to cut across the entire carrot. Your goal is to make a piece that's the same size as these. So, just like that. And those, while they're not all identical in shape, they're roughly the same size and they'll cook evenly. And here I've got potatoes, new potatoes. The great thing about new potatoes is that when I cook them in a broth, they're going to hold their shape. So I want a piece of potato about the size of the carrots and about the size that will cook at the same rate as the artichokes. So I'm just going to cut that in half. Maybe I'll take that one and cut it into quarters. This one, quarters. That one in half. That one in half. All right. So at this point, the onions are just beginning to get translucent. And what that means to me is that all of the harsh flavors, the sulfury compounds that can burn your eyes and not be very pleasant on your palate, have been driven off. That's why a lot of recipes start with onions going into the pan first. We'll tame the onions and then we'll move on. So, having tamed the onions, I don't want a lot of color on them because I'm creating a white stew. Next step, we're going to take all the artichoke hearts that we've cleaned so carefully and put those into the pot. And we're going to put the carrots into the pot. We're going to take potatoes and put those into the pot. I have a bay leaf that we're going to add. And then finally, chicken stock. All right. All the vegetables are in. I've added the chicken stock. You can see it's nice and gelatinous, a really rich flavored stock. The vegetables just barely are covered by the stock. Don't worry too much about that because as it cooks, the vegetables will sort of cook down a little bit and offer up a little bit of moisture of their own. Once this comes to a boil, reduce it to a simmer, and we're going to cook it for, I would say, about 10 or 15 minutes until all the vegetables are tender. So this has been simmering now for about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and the vegetables are all tender. I would make sure that you pierce the artichokes and the potatoes to make sure that they're tender, likewise the carrots, but they all cook at about the same rate. What I want to do is finish this broth, and to facilitate that, I'm going to take the vegetables out and just keep them on the side for right now. There we are. We'll set those over here. And we're going to finish this broth. Let me just turn it up a hair. We're going to finish this broth avgolemino style, egg and lemon. So I've got 2 eggs right here. And they go right into a bowl. I'm going to whip them until they're nice and smooth. And if this boils a little bit and just reduces and concentrates the flavor, it's not the end of the world. What we're doing right here, you should do just before you serve this dish. We're going to add eggs to this. It won't curdle or it won't turn into scrambled eggs, but we won't be able to reheat it to a boil. So just before you're ready to serve, that's when the eggs go in. I'm also going to add a little bit of yogurt. Sometimes you'll see this recipe without yogurt, sometimes with. I want a nice light colored stew. So this yogurt will bring sort of a light white cast to the finished product. Nice and smooth, really well whipped. And then finally some lemon juice. And in one hand I have the lemon, and in the other hand I have the strainer that God gave me, catching all the pits. Good. And then finally, we need to get some herbs ready to finish this dish with. So I've got dill. And let's just chop up some dill. And I have chives. And we'll do the same with those. So I'm going to turn this broth off now, and let me just bring it over here so it's easy to see. I'm going to take a small amount of the broth, and I'm going to stir it into these eggs. In effect, what I'm doing is I'm tempering the eggs. I don't want them to boil. I don't want them to get hot very, very quickly. Instead, I want to add the eggs just a little at a time to change the temperature of the eggs slowly. Now, once I've added enough of the broth that this has become warm, then I can add it back to the remainder of the hot stock. And we'll move it back to the heat. Now, from this point forward, watch it very, very carefully. In fact, if you had a thermometer, I would say you don't want to take this much hotter than about 165 degrees, something like that. As it warms up, you'll notice it'll get a little bit creamy as the egg yolks begin to thicken. At about 160 degrees, all the air that you've whipped into those eggs will be driven off. but really pay attention to the consistency. In fact, just using a spoon means that you can see how it's coating the back of the spoon. And just make sure that the entire bottom of the pan is scraped clean. Just keep it moving. And look for that sauce to become not liquid, but velvety. And we're getting there very, very quickly. I'm going to turn it way down. And I'm going to taste, and we can adjust the seasoning here. Tastes pretty good already. It needs a little salt. And I'm going to add a pinch of pepper. Some people would quarrel with me for putting black pepper into a white sauce, but I love black pepper, and I'm less enamored of white pepper. That's good. Let's go ahead and get the herbs in there. And see what kind of a difference that made. A big difference. It tastes great. And then to my taste, it still needs just a little bit more lemon. One thing that might be a good idea if you've never done this before is just take a small amount of this sauce, put it into a small pan, and cook it over the heat and let it go all the way. Let it go all the way until it curdles. In effect, then, you've seen it undercooked, overcooked, and you then become the expert because you know exactly when it's properly cooked. Okay? Now I'm seeing a little bit of steam rising off the top, and that is an indicator to me that I should be paying attention. Let's evaluate the viscosity. Looks good. And I would say it's time for us to bring all the vegetables and add them back to the sauce. Just make sure that the vegetables are warmed through. Now the steam is coming back out of the pot. Just a few bubbles breaking the surface at the edge. And I'm going to turn the heat off. I think we're there. I'm going to serve this stew right from the pot that I cooked it in. It wasn't by accident that I chose a nice copper pot, so we'll just clean the edges a little bit. And that is all there is to that. Artichoke and potato stew, Avgolemino style. While it may seem strange to imagine eating flowers, the vegetables that make their way onto our plate represent all parts of the plant. The roots, the stems, the tubers, the seeds, the buds, and yes, even the beautiful and delicious flowers.